Come for the bread, stay for the politics. My name is Ben Walsh, and this is Let Them Eat Bread. Today we are going to be making my traditional challah recipe, and we will be using a stand mixer to do it. So, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our yeast mixture. So, I'm going to pour 6 ounces. Let's get ounces first. I'm going to pour 6 ounces of water in here and then microwave it. If you get a little over 6, like I just did, not a problem. All right, so let's put this in for about 30 seconds in our microwave. We want the temperature to be between 105 and 110 degrees. So if you need to put yours in for a little longer, then that's okay too. I'll be checking in on mine after about 30 seconds, but I might need to put it back in, and you might need to as well. If you don't have a thermometer, the best way to check if it's about the right temperature is for you to put your finger in it and see if it feels warm. All right, let's go and check on it. Alrighty. We've got 94 degrees. All right, so this isn't done yet, so let me just put it in for another 10 seconds. The important thing is to not have it too hot. So obviously, if it feels like it's very warm, or if it hurts your finger to put in, you need to find a way to cool it down somehow. All right, so this is feeling a little warm. Let's see what our temperature is. All right, so 107 degrees. Perfect. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a tablespoon of white superfine sugar, which I have here. We're going to mix this into our water, and this is to feed our yeast. Remember, yeast is alive, and it wants to eat. So make sure that we're feeding it. Make sure we're feeding it. And that's leaking. Sorry, I'll clean that up in a sec. All right, you just want about a tablespoon in there. Then mix it around. And you want to mix your sugar in until it dissolves. That shouldn't take very long since the water is warm. And if there's a little bit of sugar at the bottom, not the end of the world. All right, so now we're going to get our yeast. Remember to keep your yeast in the fridge. In its dry form, your yeast is going to preserve better in the fridge, so remember just to do that. We're going to take our tablespoon measure once again, and we're not going to fill it all the way up. We're going to do what's called a scant tablespoon. So we're just going to fill it up just below its full. And we're going to sprinkle it on top. We're not going to dump it in, we're going to sprinkle it on top. And using our fork that we had here, we're just going to fluff it. So what I mean by fluffing is you're going to take your fork and just do a little round motion on the top, just to get the yeast to incorporate a little bit with the sugar water mixture you've got in there. The yeast isn't going to dissolve, so if it doesn't look like it's dissolving, it looks like it's sitting on top, that's fine. Just give it a few stirs till the water starts to become cloudy with it, and then you're pretty much done. So now that our yeast mixture is finished, we're going to cover it up. I'm going to put it aside. We're going to set a timer. The reason we're covering it is to keep that heat in. We want to keep the heat in as much as possible so that the yeast don't cool down too much. They continue to do their work of eating the sugar in the water and producing carbon dioxide, which is going to give for us that lovely rise and bloom that we want with the yeast. Remember, put it back in the fridge. It needs to live there. Now the next thing we're going to do is create our other liquids. Is going to create our other liquid mixtures. This is going to involve our eggs, our honey, and our oil. So we're also going to put some water in here, which will help give us some extra liquid. So again, about 6 ounces of water. And if you put a little bit more in your first set of water, put a little bit less in this one. Yeah, so I put about 5.6 in this one, so I went a little overboard with the water in the yeast mixture. Okay, that's taken care of. We're going to microwave this again. You don't want it to microwave as long. You want the temperature of this to be just below 100 degrees. So in your microwave, it's probably going to be like 25-30 seconds, but I wouldn't give it more than 30 seconds in your microwave. All right, well, we let that sit. I'm just going to clean this off real quick. We do this show together. We do it live. If I make a mistake, you see it. If you make a mistake, well, I don't see it. So I guess you got some, I guess it's better for you. So if you do make a mistake, you can at least hide yours. But you're going to see me make mistakes. I'm not perfect, and we're doing it together. We are learning together. All right. So I put this in for about 30 seconds. Let's see how warm it is. All right, so this is running a little hot. Now, this is about 105 degrees, 106 degrees. It is not going to cook your eggs. Your eggs need a lot hotter to cook, so you don't really have to worry about it. If you are really nervous, though, you can put in your other liquid ingredients, your oil and your honey first. But I'm actually just going to go ahead and put my eggs in here, and we'll go from there, because I don't think the water is hot enough that we're going to cook the eggs. So now we have to put 2 whole eggs and 1 egg yolk in here. So let's start with our whole eggs. Easiest way to crack an egg, by the way, just give it a 1 hard whack on a flat surface. All right, there's 1. Second one. All right, for a third one, I actually have a bowl of egg whites in my fridge. Since we do this every week. Let's get that out there. There we go. And we're going to crack our egg white into here and our egg yolk into our container there. Ooh. All right. Be careful with as much as possible. You don't want to get any white in our yolk. But more importantly, if you're collecting whites like I am here, you don't really want to get any yolk in your white. Okay, that went well. Put this back in the fridge real quick. Now we've just touched eggs and the outside of the egg, and most of the salmonella on an egg is on the outside. So real quick, we're going to go wash our hands. I suggest you do too. Keep things as sanitary as possible in here. If you want to, right now, I'm just toweling off my hands, you can take a whisk and just mix the water and the eggs together. It will cool down the water a little bit, especially if your eggs, like mine, were sitting in the fridge. But if not, we're just going to put some more liquid in here. So, take my oil. So we're going to get 7 tablespoons of oil and 7 tablespoons of honey. And the way I like to do it is I like to I like to alternate between the oil and the honey. That allows the honey to come out more easily. It also means I have to count it out loud. because I'm terrible at counting with these types of things. So we're going to do it together. If you think this is silly, then you can just pour all of your oil in at once and all your honey in at once and do it that way. But I'm going to count it. So you've got a couple moments here. This is also 1. 2. 2. 3. 3. 4. 4. 5. Almost there. 5. Oops, 6. A little much. That might be 6 and 7. And we'll just a little tiny 7 for the oil. Right, 6. And we're actually going to do 7 with the honey right now, just because I'm only going to put a tiny bit of oil in. Since I spilled a little bit of oil on that last time. All right. Let's just put a tiny little bit of oil, probably half a tablespoon. If you spilled like me, if not, do the full 7. You will need it to counteract the amount of flour that goes in here. All right, we are now done with our tablespoon measure. You can chuck it in the sink. You grab a whisk or that fork you were using earlier, and we're going to mix this mixture. Now, it's going to be a little viscous, so don't go in and stir really fast right away, because if you do, you're going to spill it all over the place, which will not be fun. Oop, and I didn't set a timer, so it's been at least 5 minutes. Let's just set a 15-minute timer, and we'll just check on it when we're done here. Typically, I would have set a 20-minute timer right at the beginning when I put the yeast mixture to the side to bloom, and we would check it at around 5 minutes. So we're still going to check it when that timer says 5 minutes, or just when we're kind of finished doing everything here, just to make sure that our yeast is bloomed. And by the way, there's no real set time on yeast blooming. It blooms at its own pace, more or less, but a good way to check on it is, just to look over and see if it's bubbling up. And if you've got a good layer of bubbles on top, it's probably bloomed enough, even if you haven't gone through your whole 20 or 15-minute timer. Okay, so this is where we want it. Let's put this off to the side real quick. And now we are going to put our dry ingredients together. So because we're using a stand mixer today, I am using the bowl of the stand mixer for my dry ingredients. Move our flour over here. Grab the sugar as well. Look at that. Put our thermometer back on the fridge where it lives. All right. So bring this over here. Take our cup measure, and we're going to put about 6 cups of flour. Now you don't have to level these, but don't do heaping. If you can, fill it up and then shake it off in the bag so it's about level. But you don't need to get like a knife out or an offset spatula and level it out that way. It doesn't require that exact amount of flour, especially because with bread you can always feed more flour into it or add a little bit more liquid. There's some chemistry going on here, but the truth is a lot of it you just, there's some guessing check as well. All right, it's gonna be our third cup of flour. Number 4. There's 2 more here. 5. I think I had some heaping ones. I'm going to do a baby one. Shake out some of that flour. And don't worry if you put in too little flour or too much flour. As long as you've only changed the ratios by a tiny bit, it shouldn't be that big a deal. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our salt. I'm using kosher salt, but table salt works just fine. About a tablespoon of this is all you're going to need. Also, I encourage you to put things away once you're done using them. It'll make cleaning up in the kitchen easier. I do my cleanup after the show is over, so I'm not going to be putting stuff away on camera. It's a waste of your time and mine. Okay, so now that I have my dry ingredients, you can kind of see, well, I just moved this flour, but you could see my salt on top. What we're going to do is we're going to put this in our standing mixer. Lock our bowl in place. And then if you do have a standing mixer, you're going to want to use this. This is our dough hook. The design of this allows it to knead. This will do a lot of this is going to do pretty much all the kneading for us. But you want to make sure that you're using this as opposed to any other attachment. This is really the attachment you want to use for bread. So your stand mixer is going to have a bunch of settings. Put it on the lowest setting for 30 seconds. This is going to incorporate the salt and the flour. It doesn't have to be exactly 30 seconds, but I like 30 seconds as a good metric. It's easy to remember, and then the flour gets to interact with the salt and just kind of mix the salt all the way through. Okay. All right, so this is saying we've got about 11 minutes left on our yeast mixture. I'm actually just going to check it. Let's see. It's looking all right. I think we will leave it for another minute or two. But I'll bring it over and show you. You can actually see. Bring it up to the light a little bit. Take its lid off. You can see that there's a distinct layer of bubbles and foam. That's like carbon dioxide there. And there's a distinct kind of like liquidy layer underneath. By the way, if your yeast is not producing that reaction, you have 1 or 2 problems. One, you didn't put enough food in for the yeast to eat, or secondly, you have yeast that's no good. Even if you're keeping your yeast in the fridge, after a while, your yeast can go. Typically, yeast is going to last a long time, but even yeast can go bad eventually, so you just need to be careful. Watch the expiration date of your yeast. Read the instructions of the container your yeast came in. Sometimes it'll tell you how long it takes for that yeast to go bad. And this is going to be true whether, no matter what kind of yeast you're using. For active yeast, for what's called fresh yeast, which we're rarely going to use on the show, if ever, but for fresh yeast, that goes bad really quickly. So typically, if you can get that, not a lot of places will sell it, you're going to be using it pretty quickly. So that you don't have to worry about storing because it's going to go bad almost immediately. But for your instant yeast or your active dry yeast, the active dry yeast is what we're using, the kind you bloom ahead of time. The best way to tell if it is alive and it is doing well is just to test it, is to bake something with it and to see, if it's going to actually work. So that layer is actually getting up a little bit. I think I'm going to pull it right now, and we'll just start putting our dough together. And I think that'll be fine. Turned off our timer. So you're not really going to be able to see what I'm doing, so I'm just going to kind of tell you what I'm going to do right before I do it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my yeast mixture, I'm going to pour it in to my mixture over here, while the standing mixer is on the second lowest setting. On mine, it's 2. As soon as the yeast mixture is just combined, I'm going to take our egg mixture here, and I'm going to do the same thing. And then you're going to let that kind of get to know each other, let that move about together until it comes together. And then you can speed that up, because we're going to do all of our kneading in here. And once it's together, I'll talk a little bit more about how to knead in the stand mixer. So give me 1 second. And actually, I misspoke a little bit. You want to put it on stir first, and then you'll move it to 2. You'll know to move it to 2 because your standing mixture will start groaning a little bit. All right. So listen to your stand mixer. It's going to tell you when you need to speed up. Mine is doing that now, so I'm going to speed it up. It's going to look clumpy. It's going to look dry at first. Just leave it. It'll be all right. It's mixing those ingredients together and starting the process of expanding the gluten threads and creating more gluten in the bread. Now, if your bread dough is really dry and it's really not coming together at all, just add a little bit more liquid. You want to do it a small amount at a time. You want to make sure that you're not adding too much liquid, because you don't want to keep adding and adding and adding to it, because it'll just get larger than it needs to be. All right, at this point, your bread should be pretty much combined. I've moved mine up to 2. If your stand mixer is starting to groan, you can speed it up a little bit. But at this point, you want to set a timer for 10 minutes. So I'm going to go set a timer real quick. So sometimes what might happen is your dough may ride up your dough hook, and that's okay. It's normal for it to do that. But if it gets to the point where your stand mixer is struggling to mix it, you just want to make sure that you use either your clean hands, a spatula, or something like that. Just scrape down the sides to make sure that, and just to scrape down the dough, put the dough in the bottom so that the dough can actually do its work of getting in there and expanding and pulling the dough in different directions, which is how it needs it, instead of us kneading it. So that'll keep going. You can speed it up, you can slow it down. It really just depends on your stand mixer. But you want to hear one of two things. You want to hear kind of that slapping sound. So as it starts to spin and the bread and the dough starts to just form those pulls, it's going to kind of come away from the central mass, and it's going to slap against the side. You want to hear that. That's how you know that your bread is actually starting to, that the gluten strands are starting, the gluten is starting to develop in the bread there. And the other thing is, you just want to hear kind of a relatively stable humming of your bread maker or your standing mixer. That's how you know it's not straining, that it's not having trouble with the dough, that your dough isn't too thick. But again, this is a listening game, so you're going to be listening to your standing mixer, and you're going to be listening to your dough and making sure it's making the right sounds for you, and adjust as necessary. Another thing you can do if your stand mixer starts to get very hot during this process, as mine just did, I'm actually just going to let it sit and rest for a minute and let that dough sit and rest for a minute. Not a problem. It's not going to hurt your bread at all to kind of sit for a minute. In fact, one way that you can knead if you're not using a machine is literally just every 5 minutes to do one pull, fold it over, and then rotate the bread, and then come back in 5 minutes and do the same thing. Obviously, that takes a lot longer than what we're going to be doing, which is just a 10-minute quick knead here, but you get the same result with a lot less work. So I'm just letting this sit for another minute or two just to cool down a little bit. I've just pulled my dough off my dough hook. Our dough is a little dry today, but that's okay. Not really the end of the world at all. So what we're going to be doing in the meantime, while we let that wait, is actually really nothing. We're really not going to be doing anything in the meanwhile while that waits. Actually, I can just wipe down my board here a little bit. So that's set for a minute. I'm going to set my timer back another 2 minutes just so we get the full 10-minute knead time, and we're going to turn our mixer back on. So another quick thing you may need to do while it's mixing is because the mass of dough is going to be pretty thick, and your stand mixer will start to kind of jiggle around a little bit, you may just need to put your hand on top and just kind of lean on top of it just a little bit. Again, this allows you to monitor the temperature because you got your hand right on top there of the standing mixer, but also just to make sure that your stand mixer isn't moving around, and if it's on a table or a counter that doesn't shuffle itself off the counter, obviously you don't want to do that because it'll break your standing mixer and ruin your bread. So. So because we're doing this live and mistakes can happen, we're actually going to change plans because my standing mixer has gotten very hot and I don't want to push it any farther. I don't want to break it. So since we're changing plans, I'm just going to take a tiny bit of flour here, put it out on our board, and we're just going to knead the old-fashioned way. I just want to make sure. At this point, if you do have to switch like I'm doing, you can ignore your timer. This dough is actually kind of feeling pretty good, so we may not need to knead it for a ton of time, but obviously we want to make sure that no matter what method we're doing, that our bread passes the window pane test, which I talked about last week, and I will talk about again when we do it this week. Just get this moving a little bit. Most of the kneading work should have already been done. Your dough should start to kind of feel soft, even if a little tacky. So even if you continue to use your standing mixer like I'm not going to be able to do, you do still want to feel your dough every now and again. Best way to do that, put some flour on your hands, feel the dough, feel how it's doing, and that way you know if it's ready or not. And if you think it's ready, like I think ours actually might be close to, we're gonna take our dough, we're gonna take one hand in an L pattern, we're gonna put it over our dough here, and we're gonna squeeze off a little ball. With the other hand, we're gonna twist that ball off, okay? And then, so we've got a little ball of dough. We're gonna use our thumbs to kind of make this into a flat circle. We wanna be stretching this while we're doing it. Okay. And the more stretchy it is, the more likely it is that it's done. Oh yeah, this is so done. Okay, oh, this is great. Okay, so we're gonna take our bread dough, and we're gonna shine it up to a light, and if that light comes through, it is done. You can actually, oh, you can't see me, but you can see that light come through. It's very, very clear that this is done. So we're gonna put this back on here. We're gonna do a quick 1-2 knead. Thank you to the standing mixer for doing most of the work for me, even though it tapped out. And let me just move this flour away because we don't want it right now. We will use it later. So the bread is still a little tacky. Yours should be too. If it's not just a little tacky, keep working it until it is. You don't want a dry ball of dough. So we're going to take our hands, we're going to cup our dough, our bread ball, and we'll turn off our timer first so it doesn't yell at me in a minute. All right, so let's try this again. We're going to cup our dough, and we're just going to move it around here. You can actually see a little bit that the dough is holding on. You should be able to feel that the dough is holding on to the breadboard. And that our top, the top of our bread, it's hard to see on camera, but you should be able to see in yours that it's actually becoming more taut. It almost looks like you're stretching a rubber band on top. It should look kind of rubbery. And using this method, it should just come together into a nice, tight dough ball, which mine just has. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a tiny bit of flour, just put it down here, so that this ball is easier to get up once we are ready to bring it up. So now we have to let it rise. So the way that we're going to do this, we're going to prep our bowl. You should have a fairly large bowl for rising, like a kitchen bowl. I'm using this one. And this is a glass bowl. It's going to be cold coming out of the cupboard or wherever you took it from. So what we're going to do just to prep our dough ball a little bit, just to help out our dough ball a little bit, is we're going to turn it over and we're going to run it under some hot water in the sink. You don't want it to be too hot. You want to run it under water that's just warm enough to wash your hands. And we're just going to run it until the bowl starts to feel a little warm. We're going to run a paper towel over it just to dry it off real quick. And then we're going to plop our bread in with some oil. So be back in a second. All right, so you just want to do that until it's warm to the touch, which my bowl now is. I'm going to wipe it dry. Water is not going to help here. So we're just going to take our paper towel, make sure the inside is dry. The outside doesn't matter so much. Obviously, if you're going to put it down on a wood surface or a surface that can be harmed by water, make sure the outside is dry too, but you really just want to make sure the inside is dry. So we've got our bowl. Here, we're going to put about a tablespoon or two of oil in our bowl. This is going to allow our bread to rise more easily. All right, so that's probably a little too much. It's probably just over 2 tablespoons there. So I like to do this with my hands, but first, just take your oil and go around the bowl. Now, the oil's clear, so you can't see it here, but essentially, you're just taking that puddle of oil that you just made, and you're spreading it around your bowl as much as possible. This will make it so you don't have to use your hands as much to spread the oil around. It's also just fun to do and fun to demonstrate. So do as much as you can. Obviously, don't spill your oil if you can. And then if there's any nooks and crannies left, and you should be able to see them pretty easily, just use your hands and just give a little bit. Just coat that whole inner bowl in oil. If you have too much oil, you want to get rid of some of your oil, that's fine, just dump it out. We are going to coat our bread in oil, so just leave a little bit of oil in there. So I have a little bit of oil left, so let's take our bowl of dough and plop it in here in our oil. So that's oily on the bottom. Let's flip it over, get some oil on that side too. Again, this stops it from drying out. And your bread is not going to rise or rises nicely if it is dry. All right, so we have our bread, we have our oil in our bowl is warm. Draw out this napkin real quick. So now we are going to cover this up and we are going to set it aside. So using plastic wrap or a plastic lid or something like that, anything you want. I'm going to use plastic wrap. We're going to create a pretty much an airproof seal. We want to keep all that warmth in. So if you are in the northern hemisphere, like I am, it is, I guess Fool's Spring is probably the best way to put it. It's not really spring, but we did move the clocks back and all that. So we're going to cover this nice and tight. So anyway, to just finish that thought, your house might be a little cool. So you want to put this in a warm place. If you have an attic or an upstairs or somewhere warm. You don't want to expose this directly to sunlight, though. And the reason for that is it'll just get too hot. It'll get too hot, it will rise too quickly, and it won't perform its second rise, and it just won't be nice. So we're going to cover this. So I've got plastic wrap down to keep the heat in, to stop stuff from escaping and to stop stuff from getting in, and I'll put a towel on top just to keep that heat in. So we're going to set our bowl over to the side here, and we're going to set a timer for an hour. Okay, so now that we've got that, actually, let's put this way real quick. All right, now that that is set, we're going to come back to it in an hour. In the meanwhile, let's see if there are any questions in the chat. No, there are not. All right, so let's move on to the whiteboard. At this point, you don't need to keep watching, obviously. You can if you want to. We'll be back in an hour if you're just here for the bread. But if you want to stay for the politics, come listen. I'm going to talk about some things that came to my attention this week. And let's go to the whiteboard. All right, so we have a lot of topics on the whiteboard, and I even had a theme for this week. On Monday, I had a theme. I was going to talk about this whole part of the economy, which I think is kind of problematic and that we need to move past. That's just kind of ingrained in us as Americans. And then Tuesday happened, and we got some terrible news out of Atlanta. And I'm pretty sure everyone watching this knows what happened in Atlanta. There was a mass shooting of 8 people in spas and salons, including 6 Asian women. And it was really awful. And then the sheriff saying that he just had a bad day. Look, when I have a bad day, I have a tall glass of wine, I put on my fuzzy slippers, and I play Xbox for hours. You don't kill people if you have a bad day. It's just... So anyway, that level of defending a murderer, a mass murderer, is just heartbreaking. But I wanted to use the anger from this moment, the frustration from this moment, to talk about the long history of Asian American racism. So just to start, I'm going to use the term Asian American, and I'm going to describe a lot of things about the racism and things like that. This is not to be disinclusive of Pacific Islanders, of Pacific Islanders who were born and raised in the United States, Asians from the subcontinent, Indians, Pakistanis, who also experienced racism. This isn't to be exclusive of any of those, or people who are born in Asia and come here and aren't born here, wouldn't categorize themselves as Asian Americans. I'm going to use the word Asian American, Asian interchangeably, but please know that I really do sincerely mean kind of that whole group there, and I'm not meaning to exclude anyone. So let's start. What is Asia? Okay, Asia is a continent. It's pretty huge. The area that we call Asia spans from the Urals in Russia down to the Red Sea in Egypt, all the way, which includes Turkey and the Middle East, by the way, all the way over to Indonesia and Siberia. It's an absolute giant area. There are dozens of countries there, each of which have their own unique cultures. Their people are not the same. They're not one type. They don't all look the same. They don't speak the same language. So first we have to understand kind of the great diversity that comes with the word Asian, someone from Asia. And by the way, not all people who live in Asia would identify as Asian. I think if you talk to a Turk or an Israeli or a Saudi, they wouldn't identify as Asian. My guess is they probably wouldn't. I don't know if people residing in the subcontinent, India, Nepal, and Pakistan would identify as Asian either. But in the modern kind of colloquial sense, we think of Asian as Southeast Asian, China, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and the nations around there. Apologies if I missed any. And there's been a long, storied, and problematic history about the treatment of those people in the United States. So I want to go all the way back to the gold rush. So, by the way, there were Asian people of Asian descent, people coming from the continent of Asia in the United States. Before then, their migration to what is now the United States wasn't new in the 1800s when we started talking, when we had the gold rush. But I want to go there because that's kind of the start of the real systemic bigotry against them. And I want to talk it through. So when they were coming over here, they were not allowed to pan for gold. So when there was a big gold rush in California and along the West Coast, for the most part, we did not allow Asians to pan for gold. So in order to make money, they set up other industries. And the industry that became most famous for were the laundries, were the laundromats. And this obviously was essentially a support organization for the many miners and people who traveled across the country to pan gold because they weren't allowed to pan gold. And, you know, they were forced into, I don't want to say they were forced into that particular profession, but they were forced out of kind of these other professions. So immediately you have this weird dichotomy going on where, you know, we want to reward them as being entrepreneurs. We start to see the model minority stereotype floating around. But at the same time, we were actively using racism to stop them from getting more lucrative jobs panning gold, where lots of people were able to make their fortunes and get rich. And by the way, the model minority stereotype, I want to talk about a little bit. Obviously, I'll do that over the course of the whole this whole topic. But model minority is essentially a way to pit Black folk and Asian folk against each other in the name of white supremacy. And there's nothing else to it, right? I mean, that's really how it's been used. So when I hear people say, oh, you know, well, crimes against Asians can't be white supremacy because Black people commit them too, that's a lie. It simply isn't true. The pitting of Black folk against Asian folk using the model minority stereotype is pervasive throughout American history and started a long time ago. So we're moving on from the time of the gold rush up until there were lots of people coming, primarily from China, and the United States was much more an explicitly racist country in government than it is today. At the federal level anyway. And we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? Essentially establishing quotas. Hey, only so many different types of people come here. And by the way, this was not the first of the exclusion acts. There were exclusion acts against other people as well. To understand the context that the people from China, people from the continent of Asia were not the first people to kind of be subject to these racist laws. But there was one there. We move up through history, and more people are coming from Asia, and a lot of times we are seeing, people come from Asia whose families are wealthy, who are able to enroll their children in, who have brilliant children that they're able to enroll in great higher academic institutions, higher education academic institutions, and we start to see stereotypes about Asians in math. And again, the model minority stereotype comes up because the thought is then like, hey, you know, this is pitched at Blacks to turn Asians and Blacks against each other. But essentially, the model minority stereotype is thrown in the face of Black people again to say, hey, you know, they can make it. They came here with nothing. Not true. They came here, and they're starting their life over. Not always true. Why can't you, right? And it was always a ploy to get Black people to hate Asian people and to get Asian people to hate and fear Black people. And by the way, all the while, not to be concerned about white people who are really doing the legislating and the killing and the hate primarily, and who were creating these narratives. You move up through the 20th century, there were all sorts of problems. Obviously, there are these these problematic tropes about Asian sexuality having to do with submissive women, having to do with women in massage parlors, Asian women being prostitutes. And again, this is just a trope. It's a type. It's not real. And again, with all the things that I'm going to be discussing here, none of it is real. Yes, it's true that some families were able to enroll their Asian children in great academic institutions in the United States, but a lot of times it was because who we saw coming from the Asian continent, we were seeing their best, right? They were able to send the brightest, wealthiest families here. And those are the ones, by the way, who are being put up on that pedestal, again, specifically to hurt Asian-Black relations and to support white supremacy. Taking that racism that was already ingrained in us, many people I don't want to say will remember, but remember learning in school that on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese. Now, there are tons of reasons why that happened. I don't really want to get into them here. It doesn't really have to do with race relations at all. But so what was America's reaction to Asian people or Japanese people or the Japanese nation even just bombing the United States? Well, we built internment camps. We rounded up Japanese Americans, Asian Americans who didn't do anything wrong, who showed, literally just for speaking Japanese, for knowing Japanese people, and we locked them up for years, all throughout World War II, which is just an absolute stain on our country's history. But But we couldn't have done that without the pervasive racism of the laundromats, of the Asian submissives, of the model men, all the racism that we had built before, the Chinese Exclusion Act, everything. It all led up to that, right? So we took that racism we already had and we responded to a crisis in the worst way possible. And we locked all these people up. By the way, we did not, as a nation, learn this lesson at all. Learn our lesson from that experience at all. And after the war, people got reparations who were like, oh shit, this is, we probably shouldn't have interred all these people for literally no goddamn reason at all. But we paid out, but we didn't learn anything from that experience. And Asian American racism continued to be pervasive. We had films in the later part of the 20th century. I believe Full Metal Jacket is the one that most people are talking about now, with the comment, "Me love you long time," I think was the line. Obviously, a racist trope about broken English, a racist trope about submissive Asian women, and things like that. And of course, there has always been some level of xenophobia, and it's just building and building. And then, of course, in 2019, when we had the beginning of the coronavirus, we heard from the President of the United States and many of his allies that this was the China virus, that this was Kung flu, that China did this to us intentionally. There were conspiracy theories that this was crafted in a laboratory in China in order to infect Americans. Which, by the way, the rationale of that is completely ludicrous. I mean, hundreds and thousands of Chinese people died. Lots of other Asians died. The virus has spread throughout the entire world. Millions of people have died. Many more millions have gotten it and will have long-term issues. I don't even want to. Anyway, and then for a year and change, we have this constant rhetoric: China virus, Kung flu, China, right? All these ridiculous things, and they're all wrong. Every single one of them is wrong, and I obviously totally disavow them. And then we saw a rise in attacks on Asian Americans or people who looked Asian. And at this point, the people who are committing these attacks they weren't even just attacking Chinese people, not that would make it any better, right? But they're attacking all people from Asian descent, which shows you that this long history of racism has just been building and building and building, and this is where we are again. where Asians and Asian Americans and are being attacked in the street. Terrible and awful footage of people being pushed into the street and beaten in broad daylight. And this is just, we haven't really learned a way in the United States to fix this. And then, of course, we have someone who's claiming he has a sex addiction. So after all of this, right, and all the hatred towards Asians, we have just last Tuesday someone claiming that their murder of 6 Asian women and 2 others was because of their sex addiction. Because sexism has nothing to do with racism in America, and especially when it comes to Asian women. I mean, it just does. I hope I've laid out the history for you enough, but we have, in this country, fomented for hundreds of years a racial hatred of Asian people and a sexually frustrated racial hatred of Asian women. And that needs to play into every discussion that we have about this. I saw discussions by Asian women who were saying that they had never experienced racism without sexism, which isn't surprising at all, really. It's unfortunate and it's awful and it ought to be condemned. But we can't just think about this shooter and the victims. May they all rest in peace and may their memories be for a blessing. Without the context of racial violence, sexual violence, and where they intersect, and who the victims of that are. And those 6 Asian women who were brutally, violently, terribly murdered, had their lives stolen from them by this man who is just a few years younger than I am, 21 years old. It's harrowing. And I think as a nation, we really need to take the time to reflect about taking care of all of our citizens. And not just citizens, but taking care of everyone who lives here. Because that type of violence by someone so young is truly, truly terrible. And we need to fight it, and we need to fight the language that makes it possible at every turn. This shouldn't be happening, although it is happening, and we all know why. And I want to send my heart and soul out to everyone who is grieving, everyone who feels scared, at whether they are Asian presenting or white presenting, or from a different part of Asia, and they've felt discrimination. I'm so sorry that this is happening, and we have to do better. We can't continue to treat the Asians who live in our country like this. There are brothers, there are sisters, there are non-binary siblings. And whether you know someone who has been targeted, or you know someone who knows someone who's been targeted, or even if you don't know any Asian people at all, take this moment to think about how the history of America has created such a violent and dangerous place for them here, and what we can do to fix that. Okay, that was a little heavy. I want to get a quick drink of water. I'll be right back before we switch topics. Wow. Okay. I want to talk about something a little more positive. So many of you may have received your stimulus check recently. You can tip your hat to Congress if you want for that. Honestly, I think they should have been 2000. They should have come much sooner, and they should have been recurring. This catastrophe that is COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon, and $1,400 or however much you got or didn't get, it's not going to last. People owe rent for months and months. That aside, there's another issue with these COVID checks. So during the first 2 rounds of stimulus, the $1,200 check and the CARES Act and the $100 check. I forget the name of that act. Maybe that was the CARES Act. I'm getting my relief packages confused. But so anyway, so the first two sets of relief, so the 1,200 and the 600, they were done through what's called regular order in the Senate, which means there were 60 votes to pass them. And the important part about that actually has to do with some provisions that were in those bills. So that money that went out to people the first and second time was protected. So just to kind of explain a little something about how this all works, if you owe money to someone and they've sued you for that money, they've won against you, they can force your bank to take the money from you as soon as you have it to give it to them, to pay your debt. I think this is a terrible practice. For the most part, it just harms poor people who need every dollar that they can get, because oftentimes they're working either paycheck to paycheck or less than that. But the truth is that's the system as we have it now. And lawmakers recognized that in the first two COVID relief packages and had explicit provisions protecting that money, essentially saying, hey, banks, if you have a judgment, if you've been implicated in a judgment, and you would ordinarily send this money off to a debt collector, you can't do that for these particular sums of money. These sums of money are not meant for that. They're meant to relieve people, to buy groceries, pay rent, things like that. And because the $1,400 and subsequent checks were not done through regular order, that type of provision wasn't allowed to be in the bill. Now, I talked last week about the undemocratic nature of the Senate. Again, I think limiting what can be in what to pass it by certain numbers, I think it's all very problematic. But the truth is, the way it is that this provision didn't get in. So Congress is now scrambling because they have essentially sent this money out, and your debt collector can just, suck it right out of your account. And this is, I don't know anyone personally who this has been the reality for, but I've seen reports that people have had their money essentially snatched immediately by debt collectors from banks who have pulled the money from them. And, it took months to get this passed. So that money's already gone. What are you going to do, Democrats in Congress and Joe Biden, to get people their money back who've just lost it? What, you think the debt collector's going to give that money back to the people? No, of course they're not. They're in it they're in it for that money. There's no way they're going to give it back. So you either have to replace that money somehow, or you have to find some other way. And I don't have all the answers, but there has to be a solution somehow in order to fix this, because there should not be the ability for stimulus, which is, and stimulus is such a terrible word for it too. The survival checks, these are survival checks, and there should be more of them. But so, there's no good reason why these survival checks should be allowed to be stolen by greedy debt collectors. I'm sorry, I have no sympathy for the people whose value add to society is debt collection. You're not adding value to society. You're just not. But anyway, so Congress is scrambling now to get this provision in a new bill, which should hopefully correct this egregious oversight. But I think, just like the 1,400 checks, this is going to be too little, too late. I don't know how they're going to do it. I really hope that someone has a plan. If I had a plan, I would tell you. I think probably what they're going to have to do is just replace that money. And they're going to have to replace that money through regular order so that type of protection provision can be in the bill. And I just don't know how likely that's going to be. I don't know. So I'm really hoping that people get some help. But I know that it's been a long time coming, and it may not ever arrive. So, all right. So the next thing I want to talk about, how much time do I have? I'll get a lot of time. All right. So there's let's go back to the narrative thing. So there's 3 topics I want to cover in the next 30 minutes or so that I have here. I want to talk about voter fraud and election fraud. I want to talk about voting restrictions and voting policy, and I want to talk about the disclosure versus the regulated economy. So let's start with voter fraud versus election fraud. So we just had an election in the United States in November, and a lot of people were talking about like voter fraud and election fraud, and what does it all mean, right? So if you don't know, voter fraud is an attempt to is a committing of an illegal act related to a single voter and the casting of votes. So in other words, if I went to my home county and I tried to vote, and then I went to another county and I tried to vote, that's voter fraud, right? That is the act of a single individual attempting to influence an election in a way with their vote that is illegal. Now, election fraud is a completely different thing. And isn't talked about nearly enough. Election fraud is essentially anything that the powers that be do to change the course of an election, to change who can vote in an election, and to change who can win an election. So the most common types of of election fraud in United States elections is typically things like voter purges, the way ballots are structured, and things like that. So the difference between the two is just really size and scale. And the thing that I think is important to point out here is that in the United States, there are almost no, like statistically, there are almost no cases of voter fraud. There was a study done, I forget by which institution, but essentially they found like 12 cases out of 1 billion votes. And I can't do the math on that, but it's very, very tiny, essentially. And by the way, typically, the thing that's interesting about voter fraud is that typically when people do voter fraud, they get caught. Like the reason that we know that voter fraud happens sometimes, albeit very rarely, is because people get caught. It's not difficult to catch people trying to vote twice or vote for someone who isn't alive, or cast a vote for their dog, or whatever the ridiculous thing they're trying to do is. But people get caught, and that really is kind of the biggest difference between election fraud and voter fraud is that people trying to commit voter fraud, individuals trying to commit voter fraud, almost always get caught and are punished. Whereas election fraud happens all the time in the United States. Election fraud is so bad in the United States that in 1965 we passed the Voting Rights Act, which had whole swaths of states that weren't allowed to change their ballot policy or voting policies without permission from the federal government, because it was just that bad. Many of you know that recently, in the last couple of years, I think it was, the VRA was essentially gutted, especially Title V, which was that title having to do specifically with states that could change their election laws or election practices before elections. The argument from the court was that the formula was wrong. And of course, within hours of that decision coming down, the states that the Supreme Court argued had learned their lesson immediately put in voting restrictions. So obviously, we need more protection from election fraud. So I want to put that aside for a second. So I want to talk about now voting restrictions. So there are a lot of different types of ways that voting is restricted. So one, obviously, I'm sure you've heard of signature match for mail-in ballots. By the way, some level of signature match is actually done on in-person votes as well. Polling place location. There were stories about, very affluent areas with smaller populations having lots of places to vote. By the way, mostly white people. And poorer places with lots and lots of people having only 1 or 2 places to vote. There being lines around multiple blocks. These just ridiculous lines for people to vote. People waiting 5, 6, 7 hours to vote. Because people really do want to vote. Like, despite the fact that voter turnout in the United States is always low comparatively to other countries, the people who do it, they're really trying. They want to vote. They want to express They want to express to the powers that be, this is my voice, this is who I pick, this is what I want. And stumbling blocks are put in their way. There was another, putting polling places near public transportation stops. Putting them away from public transportation stops, which essentially limits people who don't have cars from getting to them. What are some of the other ones? Drowning out, using redistricting to drown out groups of people's voices. That's another kind of election fraud, as it were. Requiring IDs or requiring only certain types of IDs. One of the most flagrant violations of election rights, in my opinion, that I've seen, voting rights that I've seen, in my opinion, is I think it was Texas, I don't know for sure, that essentially said if you have a driver's license, a hunting license, or a fishing license, that was an acceptable ID. But a non-driver's license or like a school ID or something wasn't allowed. And like the people who are more likely to have guns and fishing licenses are typically, again, people who can afford those types of hobbies. And again, most of them are white. So, and of course, not everyone has a car, not everyone gets a driver's license. So to require driver's licenses for voting essentially says to anyone who lives in large urban areas who don't have cars, screw you. You don't get to vote because you don't have a license. So look, I do think there is a proper way to credential people who have who are voting. But if you are going to credential people who are going to participate in voting, you need to give them that credential for free. You need to make that credential easy to get. You need to make sure that essentially everyone can do it. But the truth is, a lot of these electoral fraud schemes, the whole point is to stop people from voting. And traditionally, especially in general elections, this has been Republicans the Republican Party who has done a lot of this, although the Democratic Party has done some of this during their primaries. They're typically better in the general election about election fraud in general, and they're better about calling it out in general elections. But for primaries, they're not as good. So this isn't a one-party issue. There's plenty of blame to go around here. So, all right. So there's a new bill that passed the House. It's called HR 1. And it really is a great bill. There's a couple things I disagree with, but there are a lot of great things in it. One of the things that stood out to me is that if you're an elected official who, if you are an election official, not elected, if you're an election official and you're running in an election, you have to recuse yourself. That would, of course, cure the kind of strange things that happened in Georgia with the Stacey Abrams, Brian Kemp election. There's a requirement that judges have to have a certain code of ethics and a code of conduct, not really related to elections, but it's definitely a good thing. There's a provision that makes illegal things like putting a polling place very far away from public transportation, saying that if you're going to have polling places be few and far between, they need to be near public transportation. I think it's up within a mile of public transportation. Don't quote me on that. If you want more information on HR 1, actually, the best place to go, because I'm doing this from memory, is to go to the Brennan Center, the Brennan Center for Justice. They have a whole, essentially line-by-line write-up of the entire law. I've read it through a few times. I really suggest you do. It's a great, first of all, it's a great resource, and they really do kind of talk to people like they're normal people, not like they're lawyers, even though I am a lawyer. It's a great resource. You should check it out. It has all the details about the bill there. The other thing it would do is require automatic voter registration. I didn't mention it earlier, but one of the ways that voting can be restricted is just to make it difficult to register to vote, right? So sometimes you can only register if you're getting a driver's license. Sometimes you have to register through the mail. Well, the mail costs money, right? And look, I get it, 54 cents, whatever, but sometimes you have to request a form. You have to request a form online that requires having an internet-capable device. And it should be free. 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 Zero money, 0 cents. 0 money, 0 cents. $0, 0 cents. Oh, boy. All right. But yeah, so one of the things that we do is provide automatic voter registration for all people who are eligible. So essentially, as soon as you turn 18, you become registered to vote in your municipality, which is great. That is definitely a way that we could improve the number of people who vote in our elections. I believe there is a provision in there having to do with how many polling places per capita you should have. Super useful. There is a restriction. There is a ban on using postcards to determine if people have moved. So one of the tricks that was used to stop people from voting and to create these voter purges was that the local county election office or whatever would send you a postcard and say, hey, sign your name, send it back to us. If you do, that's proof that you're still living here and you won't be purged. Which sounds perfectly reasonable, except many voting advocates have pointed out that these postcards essentially looked like campaign mailers. They looked like spam, so people just threw them out, right? Because, look, we get tons of mail that's just junk. I get, like, a circular from the local grocery store every week that, just goes, right from my door to the recycle bin. There's, nothing in there. But if they put it in there, right, then you're not even looking at it, you're just tossing it. And then of course, for every one of those that weren't returned, the immediate thought was, oh, well, clearly this person doesn't live here. They didn't return our stupid postcard that looks like junk. So we can purge them from the rolls. So lots and lots of people will purge from rolls this way. And HR 1 bans it. Which is great. So as I said, there's lots of really great things in HR 1. You should go to the Brennan Center. I think it's brennancenter.org or brennancenterforjustice.org. Just Google it, you'll find it. And they have a whole write-up on HR 1. It's really great. They also have some anti-corruption provisions, and these are where I'm a little frustrated. And I'm going to tie this into my next segment on disclosure versus regulation a little later. But essentially, the gist of these anti-corruption provisions are, well, we have to know where the money's coming from. And we have to know who's donating to whom, and they can't just hide behind the names of these organizations. So I'm sure you've seen political ads, right? We're all spammed with them. And you see these innocuous names like Americans for Prosperity or the Center for American Progress or Friends of insert candidate name here or the Committee to Elect so-and-so. But you don't really know who's behind them. I mean, because a lot of these are PACs and super PACs, Citizens United allows people to pour literal unlimited amounts of money into them. And they are not supposed to coordinate with a candidate, but, there are lots of ways that candidates have gotten around that or have done it and just not been prosecuted. I don't know if you know this, but the Federal Election Commission is staffed by an even number of Democrats and Republicans, and they don't do anything. I don't think they have prosecuted anyone for campaign finance crimes in the last 10 years or so. At least since I've been following politics closely, I don't know of a single person who has ever been prosecuted for it. I could be wrong about that. Correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong, and I'll make a correction next week, if there is one. Not the next week. There will definitely be a next week if there's a correction. Anyway. So the idea is, okay, well, so now we're going to know which super rich people are funding our candidates. But that doesn't stop the corruption, right? I mean, what does knowing who the ad is purchased by do for you? Seriously, what does it do? I mean, there are some names of donors that float around in certain circles. You've got the baddies on the right, Sheldon Adelson, the Koch brothers. You have the baddies on the, well, they're definitely not on the left, but on the Democratic side, right? You have Bill Gates and them, and who's the other one that there? Oh, George Soros, right? The one that. Anyway, so you kind of have your big bad billionaires on both sides of the party aisle, not necessarily both sides of the ideological spectrum, but other than that, like, okay, so let's actually just let's start that premise there. So you're Republican, you see that a candidate is funded by Bill Gates, or the committee for who'sy whatsy elect whatever is funded by Bill Gates. You aren't going to vote for them anyway, most likely, right? So what does it do for you? Or by the way, if you're, I mean, it doesn't really do anything for you. The influence is already there, right? Other than trying not to get them elected, but I mean, again, if they have that much money and they have that much the ability to run ads like that, they're just marketing. It's just marketing. They're getting the name of an individual into your head so that when you go into that ballot box and you think to yourself, who do I want to vote for? The name that your brain has been pumped full of for months and months and months is going to come out. If there's an election where you don't feel strongly, and essentially, and essentially, you're just going to vote for the X or the Y, then it wouldn't have mattered any. So my frustration with this is that essentially it's saying, well, corruption's okay as long as we know who's doing the corruption. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. The fact of the matter is the influence is bought. We still have politicians that are bought and paid for. So no matter how much we know about the people who are influencing them, the truth is a lot of them are still going to get elected, and they're still going to be influenced, and they're still going to have influence peddling. And their donors are still going to have influence over them. Because as I explained last week, I think, money in politics isn't back rooms with cigars and whatever. It's just people who you feel ingratiated to, and you call up and ask for favors and ask for advice. So I think the so-called anti-corruption provisions, as far as they are of a disclosure nature, are just not adequate in the slightest. I don't think that there is a good argument that disclosure is a better manner of regulation than regulation itself. And to that end, I'm going to grab a drink of water real quick, but then I actually want to talk about the disclosure versus the regulated economy. Woo! Okay. So kind of staying on theme here. So what is the disclosure economy? The disclosure economy is the idea that the consumer, and this is typically an American thing, so I'll just use the words the American consumer, is smart enough to make good decisions about the things that they buy as long as you tell them the truth about stuff. Okay. And in theory, that sounds great, right? Like, we're really smart, we can look at a group of products, we can read all the labels, and we decide, I like that one. But the truth is, there are huge gaping holes in this landscape, if you will. And we don't regulate everything this way because of those problems. So when I was in law school, in contracts, we were talking about provisions, certain provisions that might be anti-consumer or that might be problematic for consumer and things like that. And I think we were talking about laptops. But anyway, the idea was there was a term in the contract that was just totally ridiculous and that, you would never agree to in 1,000 years. So the argument was, well, you get your term sheet when you get your thing, and you decide that term isn't, you don't like that term, okay, just ship it back. So I raised my hand and I asked, okay, but what if every business uses that term? Like, what if that term is so advantageous to business that every business is going to use it and there is no competition? There is no, like knowing that that term exists, like there's nowhere else you can go because there's no one not doing it. And by the way, the greatest example of this is arbitration. And I really want to capture the problems of arbitration in a different video. And maybe if I run out of time with this, sorry, if I don't run out of time with this, I'll talk a little bit about arbitration, even though it's not on the old whiteboard. And the professor essentially said, "Oh, well, then you need government to step in." Okay, great, in theory, right? So the problems with the disclosure economy essentially is disclosure is fine unless everyone who makes a certain product does the same thing, and then it doesn't matter which group you buy from because it's all the same. And by the way, this is especially a problem in the United States when it comes to pharmaceuticals. So, we have in the United States direct marketing of pharmaceuticals to consumers, which, by the way, is awful and terrible and just shouldn't exist, but it does. And you get to the part of everyone knows, you've all seen the commercials. Side effects include, and then they rattle off like an impossible list of side effects. Death seems to be on them for a lot of drugs. Like, side effect, you have taken this, you might die. It's like, oh, okay, so I have whatever ailment I have, and instead of that, I could die, or I could have my ailment. Okay, anyway, that's on the side, and I'm not going down there right now, just having a little bit of fun. But essentially, it's a huge problem, right? So whether it's a clause in a contract that you don't like that everyone uses, or it's an ingredient in a pharmaceutical you don't like, again, knowing that it's there doesn't help you any if everyone is doing it. And the other thing that's interesting to think about here in terms of competition, we'll kind of get rid of these things and the issues of disclosure economy. Not everyone has equal access to different brands. Let's just call them that for better, or multiple options for whatever it is you're purchasing, right? So if you live in a poorer area, or if you live in a food desert, like I do, then essentially the question becomes, do the limited outlets that you have to purchase whatever it is that you want to purchase give you the options where a disclosure economy is useful to you? And for lots of Americans, the answer is no, because oftentimes, if there is a term or an ingredient or an item that's kind of recognized as universally bad, and there is a brand or an option that doesn't include that thing, oftentimes there's going to be a premium for whatever it is they had to substitute for this. Cosmetics are actually a great example of this. And not everyone can afford to pay for that, what is becoming a luxury, right? The luxury of not having, I think for cosmetics, the big one is parabens. So again, knowing that a paraben is in your cosmetic doesn't help you, because every other similar cosmetic on the store, or that you can afford, also has it in. So in my opinion, the better way to go is to say that, well, actually, instead of telling the consumer that these deleterious effects exist in the product, or these terms exist, these anti-consumer terms exist in the contract, is to actually regulate them. Is to say that, well, actually, that provision of that contract is illegal. We don't let you do that. Or that ingredient is illegal unless it's processed in a certain way, or what have you. Or something like that, right? Because really, for a lot of Americans, the disclosure economy isn't actually choice. It's the illusion of choice. It's the play pretend that we all play in this country, that everyone has access to everything. Everyone has access to everything. You only just need to spend a little bit more money for it. You pay a premium for whatever thing you do or don't want in your product or in your contract or whatever. That we all have enough resources to negotiate this way with the organizations that we purchase things from. And the other problem is, now that I'm thinking about it, is in very few cases where we're purchasing something as consumers, do we have the option to negotiate with the company that we are purchasing from. Oftentimes, things are listed out for us, prices are listed out for us, and terms are listed out for it, and we have no say, right? Going back to the original problem, and combining this aspect with it, not only does every organization that sells the product that you're looking for use this particular term or this particular product, there's no way for you to negotiate with them to say, well, actually, I want my product this way, or actually, I want this term out, right? When you're buying something online, Amazon doesn't have a box to say, would you like to renegotiate the contract or the ingredients on your product? No, it doesn't, right? We live in an economy that is top down, where the corporations tell us what they are selling us, and there's no wiggle room. The position of the corporation is, if you don't buy it, buy something else. And of course, their hands are behind their backs there because they know that oftentimes there is not someone else to buy things from, or there is not someone else to buy things from at the price point that they're offering it to you. So essentially, all of these things kind of compound to make a purchasing environment for consumers that's very bad, that's very problematic, where consumers have almost no choice, where consumers can't control the goods that they purchase or the goods that are around them, and things like that. I mean, try going to your local supermarket and say, well, actually, can you stock this more expensive product? I mean, their answer to you is going to be, okay, who's going to buy it? Well, if you respond, well, I'm going to buy it, they're like, okay, but you're one person. Well, how often are you going to buy it? Well, so let's say it's a cosmetic, right? So let's be generous. Say a cosmetic lasts for a month. I would think most actually last longer than that, but let's pretend, right? So you go to the store, you say, I want you to stock this cosmetic. And they say, okay, great, who's going to buy it? And you say, me. And they say, how often are you going to? And then they say, just you? And you say, yeah, just me, I think. Maybe some other people, but probably just me. And they say, okay. Well, that's kind of unprofitable for us. How often are you going to buy it? Maybe we can make profit on the bulk of it. You say, I'm going to buy it once a month. And they laugh in your face. Because they have no incentive to offer more variety when the bad things that they can offer you are flying off the shelves. So essentially, the solution to all this is to have larger governments. I don't know, big scary government. But the truth is, you need people in government who are doing research, who understand how contract terms work, who understand how ingredients work, who understand how certain processes work. Because if we don't have that large level of government and doing this work independently of industries, and then regulatory bodies taking that information and regulating, we fall into the trap of organizations trying to regulate themselves. And every time an organization tries to regulate itself, it is only going to regulate itself to its profit point. It is never going to cost itself any money to regulate itself. And that self-regulation includes disclosure. It is always easier for a corporation to tell you what's in something, knowing that you may not have a choice not to buy it, than it is for them to actually find a new way or a safer way to deliver their product to you. All right, so I have a couple minutes left. Let's see. Oh, okay, vaccine distribution and centralized planning. This is again, not really a fun one, but I do want to touch on it briefly this episode because there is news about this again. I talked about this last week on the program, and essentially I was talking about patents and issues with patent law and how patents are stopping people from getting vaccines who really need them. You may have seen in the news that Joe Biden sent a bunch of vaccines to Mexico. There's a couple of interesting things about that piece of news that you may not have seen. One, the vaccines that are being sent are the AstraZeneca vaccines, which are not yet approved for use in the United States. Interesting that we're sending something that we don't think is safe enough for our citizens to citizens of another country. Not great. But also, this is being lauded as like, oh, this is so heroic. Joe Biden, he's sending these vaccines to Mexico. It's great. But Joe Biden has not gotten us into the COVAX program. So COVAX, as I described last week on the program, is an effort by the United Nations to make sure that vaccines are equitably distributed so that we do not increase the international inequality, international wealth and income inequality even further by having things like vaccine passports and things like that, and limiting economic activity to countries where vaccines are prevalent. And all that's very important. And Joe Biden has not entered COVAX, but he is on the one hand giving all these vaccines to Mexico. And look, I do actually applaud him for giving the vaccines to Mexico. Apparently, these vaccines were just kind of sitting in our warehouses and going bad. And, Biden's response was, well, we know that Mexico approves these, so let's just send them there. They can have them. It's fine. But again, if we were part of COVAX, all the vaccines that are sitting in U.S. warehouses, they wouldn't necessarily go to Mexico. They'd go to a panel of people who would essentially decide where they're needed most, and then they'd go there. I mean, and by the way, that method, as opposed to giving vaccines to your friends, giving vaccines to those who need it, is a much more sound method for vaccine distribution than what we're doing now. So I'm very disappointed that there is kind of some heroism being lauded onto Biden right now about this vaccine transfer to Mexico, while no one's mentioning that he won't join COVAX, and that these vaccines could probably have been better used by the COVAX program. That aside, though, generally speaking, in vaccine distribution, the thing that's kind of interesting about the way that we're doing in the United States is there are essentially, so every health plan in America essentially gets some measure of leeway about how vaccines are distributed. And this is either through the providers that they fund, that the state governments obviously are making some decisions. So essentially, at the very least, we have 50 different vaccine distribution organizations. Let's say 52 will count DC and Puerto Rico. 53 will count the VA. So we have at least 53 different vaccine distribution organizations. And by the way, each of them want more vaccines because they want to serve their constituencies best. And by the way, that is a wonderful thing. We want governments to want to serve their constituencies. The problem with this, of course, is the planning for the distribution of these vaccines is being done on many disparate levels without coordination. There is competition going on between states, richer states and poorer states, richer programs and poorer programs, about who gets vaccines and who doesn't get vaccines. And if we had a national system, a national health system, a Medicare for all system, or just totally nationalized health system like they have in the UK, we would have a much better time of distributing these vaccines, because there'd be one organization at the top essentially looking at the entire map of the United States and its outlying territories, and who lives where and who needs these vaccines the most, and distributing them that way. And this would allow for our vaccine distribution to go much more smoothly. We wouldn't have this issue with expiring vaccines like we have with the AstraZeneca vaccine, so that's a little different, as I mentioned earlier. But also, stories from around the country that have come in that are talking about when vaccines have when vaccines have been kind of getting close to getting bad. So, governments have panicked and just give them to whoever wants them. If we had a national distribution plan, we wouldn't have to worry so much about that, because we'd have people saying, okay, Jonestown, Ohio, right? Jonestown's in Ohio. Jonestown's Ohio needs 10,000 vaccines. Just making that up, I have no idea. But so the central government figure says, Jonestown, Ohio needs 10,000 vaccines, so let's send them 10,000 vaccines, right? Or 20,000, I guess we need two doses. Just turn this timer off, because I'm going to run out of time anyway. So essentially, the reason that the United States is doing such a poor job of rolling out vaccines is because we are trying to centralize decision-making. We are not trying to centralize this decision-making in one entity. We are having decision-making going on in more than 50 entities, and this is causing competition, which is slowing down the rate of vaccine distribution, and is ultimately hurting our effort to vaccinate Americans. I do just finally want to applaud Joe Biden for getting to 100,000 vaccinations within 58 days. He declared victory on that a couple days ago, and he actually did do it, so props to him. However, only 12% of the United States has been fully inoculated. So just something to keep in mind, and that's 12% of the entire population of 330 million people. The math on that is kind of hard. No, it's not. It's 36-ish million. So of the 100 million that he's vaccinated, only about 40 million of those are wholly vaccinated. So just some numbers to keep in your mind as we go forward with this. And again, congratulations to all those people who are vaccinated. Please go get vaccinated. The sooner we get vaccinated, the sooner we can return to normal. And quite frankly, I would like to spend the 4th of July with my family, and I'm sure you'd like it to spend it with yours. All right, so let's close out the whiteboard here for a second. Our bread has risen. I'm going to wash my hands. I've been touching a lot of things. Give me 1 second. All right, let's take a look at our bread. Let's uncover that. And that has doubled up very nicely. So here you go, take a look. This was a sprightly little ball before. This is a nice large ball. Still sprightly, I guess. Okay, so we're gonna take our plastic wrap off here, and we're gonna put it on our scale, which we're gonna turn on. From my experience, this probably weighs about 60 ounces. If you're a betting person, leave your bets in the comments. Just kidding. Don't gamble on this. This is a silly thing to gamble on. Okay, let's just get plastic on here. I'm going to take some of our flour and just move it to the middle here. We're going to knead this just a tiny bit. So first, knock your air out of it. It should be super satisfying. Just fold some of this in here. Don't get oil in your eye, like I just did. And I'll just put that on there. Can't throw it all back. All right, while I'm kneading this a little bit, just to kind of get it in one ball, what you can be doing is you can get out the tray that you are going to cook your bread on. We are going to do our second rise on the tray that we are going to cook our bread on. This should hopefully make it so you don't have to this should make it so that you do not have to transfer your bread once you've shaped it, because transferring a loaf of bread once it's shaped is really hard. All right, so this is more or less one solid mass. Just use your hands to make it into a ball-ish. We're going to plop this feller on the scale, see how much it weighs, and 60 ounces. There you go. Look at that. Well, not exactly. I was lying. But so, all right, so we're going to cut. We're going to do a 3-braid challah this week. We'll do a 5-braid and a 4-braid and a 2-braid and all these other fun braids another time. But just for now, we're just going to do a 3-braid. So let's cut this into thirds. We want each one to weigh approximately 20 ounces, just under. It's too much. It's just. And by the way, it doesn't have to look pretty as you're cutting it up. It will look pretty eventually. I'll show you how to do that, so don't fret 20 exactly. I really like the exactness of that. So I'll tell you what, we're going to leave this one as 20. Let's just do a quick couple kneads to get this to come together. Yeah, perfect. Let's just put this aside here. Cut this in half. Put it on our scale. How much do we have here? 1877. So let's get this to 20 exactly. So our last one's going to be 1975. Oh, that's not so bad. All right, let's just do that. I like the exactness of that one too. Okay, so now let's shape these into fun balls. Again, using kneading methods I taught you last week. And then don't worry about the shape of them. This is just temporary. Yeah, just temporary. All right. But you do want it to be more or less one mass. If you're having trouble with this, just keep kneading it. Remember, you are going to roll these out into logs. So if it looks a little janky, like this one does, it's fine. Okay, so now we're going to take a tiny little bit of flour. I'm just going to put it on here. If you have a bench scraper, now is a wonderful time to use it. And you're going to take your bench scraper and you're just going to shimmy it back and forth to create a light, because there's oil on your board now, right? Because we were kneading our oil bread into one piece. So the oil will actually attach to the flour and you get a nice, very light layer of flour on your work surface. All right, so I'm going to take my, well, it's not really a ball, but let's see if I can actually get this into a ball. Okay, close enough, but I've done better. All right, so we're going to take it like we always do. We use our palm, press down, and roll back. Do the same thing again, and roll back. Put it up here, palm down, roll back. Palm first, roll back. All right, so now we've done that a couple times. We're going to take our second hand, same thing. Again, we are trying to get this log shape. Don't be afraid to put some pressure on it. It is fine for you to put some weight on your bread here. It can take it. Bread dough should feel a little tough now. We've added a little bit of flour to it. It's done its rise. We've knocked the air out of it. Don't worry, it will rise again. All right, so now we're going to take this using our favorite rolling method, whether it's this one, or you just roll it on the board like I'm going to do. We're going to roll this out until it's about, I don't know, whatever this is, as long as we want it. And I'm actually just remembering that I did not take out a tray for my silicone mat. So if you did not forget to do that, good for you. You are doing better than I am today. All right. So back and forth here until you have a nice log. Remember, you want it tapered at one end if you can. This will make it easier for you to braid it together later. Remember, as much as possible, make it even. You want it the same width and length the entire time, if you can. If you still have little air pockets in your rope of bread, that's fine. Just do make sure to pop them. It becomes easier to work with when you don't have those bubbles there. All right, this one's shaping up just fine. I think there's probably just another few rolls left in it, and then we are good. All right. Yeah, it's good. Okay. So now we're going to be smart and we're going to get our tray out. Shout out to all of you who did this ahead of time. Move our egg. We're not going to use that yet. I'll tell you how we're going to use it when we do use it. Move our plastic a little bit because we're done with our scale for now. Okay, let's put our silicone pad down. If you don't have a silicone pad, parchment paper is your friend. Do not use foil for this. I repeat, don't use foil. If you're going to use foil, though, even though I said not to, non-stick foil is your friend. All right, let's put that down there. Take some more of our flour, lightly dust our work surface here so we're really smoother. Okay. Same motion as before. Just going to roll this down. And actually, it seems to be wanting to form much more easily than the last one. So we're going to get to two hands right away here. This actually might be a nicer one. Maybe this will be my outside one. Maybe I'll use that one as a middle one. Okay. Again, you want them about the same length, same width. If you can help it, if there's a little bit of variability in the width of your ropes, your strands, it's just fine. Maybe next week we'll do the slap method of kneading. That's always a fun one. Not as effective as the other methods of kneading, in my professional opinion, but it is fun. And if I'm having fun, I'm sure you guys are having fun too, since we are doing this together. All right, it's about, it's actually a little shorter. Let's just roll it out a little bit more. All right, I think that is close to what we want. It's fine to stretch. All right, last one, same basic thing. You guys are flying through it by now. This one's a little oily, so if you need to, if your ropes are a little oily, feel free to just add a little bit more flour and put a little bit of pressure on them. Help them roll out nice and even. Don't mind the entire table moving here. All right, there's a layer pocket in there. That's what was causing me some trouble. Remember, only taper on one side. You do not need to taper on both. Because we're going to be stretching our challah as it goes down a little bit, so it will be tapered enough once it gets to that other side. We just want to taper it on the one side. Okay. All right, so we've got 3 strands. I want to just one more time see if I can get this one a little longer. Okay, perfect. Let's bring this up here. Which one did I say I was going to be my middle one? This one's nice to be an outside one. Let's do my middle one. All right, we don't need this anymore. In you go. All right. So we're going to take our 3 tapered ends on this side. We're going to squish them together. Just take your 3 tapered sides in your fingers and squish. And then the motion you want to do is you want to stuff them on top of each other. So, yeah, until they stick. All right, so now take one side, fold it over. Second side, fold it over. And as you braid, you want to make sure that your braid is as tight as possible. I'm doing a little faster since I did slow last week. Trying not to stretch our dough a little bit, but that's okay. So when you get to the end, you're going to have 3 baby strands. Just smush them together and crump them underneath. And this side that should now be large and bulging, you're going to do the squish one more time. Make sure it's all together. Squish it underneath there. Now, for some reason, you decided that you were going to braid on your board and then move it over. Again, come at it this way. Squish the bread to the middle, and you can hold it like that. It should look like that when you're holding it. Put it out, allow it to stretch out a little bit. All right, so now we are going to cover this in our plastic once again. Please reuse the same plastic. Reduce first, reuse second, recycle third. All right, so that's covered. Now this still has a bit of oil on it, so you don't have to re-oil it because the plastic is actually going to keep it hydrated. Let's take our towel and we're going to cover it up. By the way, we are going to let this sit for another hour. This is going to grow. Don't tuck your towel so tightly underneath your bread, underneath your tray. If you do, you're going to run into the problem that your bread will be restricted and it will grow outwards instead of upwards, and you want it to grow upwards as much as possible. You'll notice I did not put flour underneath my bread when I put it on my tray. This is because we want the bread to stick to whatever surface that you have between the tray and the bread. This is so it will grow up, right? So that the tackiness will kind of keep that. It'll grow up instead of kind of growing outwards. And it should rise nice and high for you once it's had its hour. So I'm going to set a timer for an hour right now. All right, so our timer is set. So at this point, we've reached the end of the episode, which means I'm going to tell you what to do with this bread in an hour. So in an hour, you are going to uncover your bread. You're going to make sure it's doubled in size. If your bread has not doubled in size, recover it, let it sit for another 20-30 minutes. Check on it frequently. Make sure that that your bread doesn't overproof. If so, it won't rise as much in the oven. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to take our 4th and final egg. We're going to crack it open. We're going to mix it together. Then using a fork, a spoon, a knife, a paintbrush, or your hand, you're going to lightly coat your entire bread in the egg mixture. So that it gets golden brown in the oven. Speaking of the oven, you're going to set your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're going to cook it. You're going to put your bread in for 35 minutes. You're going to want to turn it around at 17 minutes. So once you do that, you will have a wonderful loaf of challah for your week. Wonderful for sandwich breads and all the other kind of goodies that you want in your life. Also, if you let it stale, it makes amazing French toast. So I highly recommend that. So I will see you next time. Don't forget to send us a picture of your bread loaf that you baked this week. And I'll see you next time. Take care.